My name is Estefania Hernandez. I am a clinical site supervisor for La Frontera Center. So La Frontera is a behavioral health organization here in Tucson. I don't know if you guys have seen it around. There's several different buildings. And we do a lot of different stuff. So the Unity Club asked me to come speak to you guys, and as I was trying to come up with a PowerPoint, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much information. And I know that you guys are gonna have a lot of different questions and things that you guys are more interested versus others. So I'm gonna give you a little overview of what La Frontera does, the people that we serve, and anything that we kind of run into, and then give you a little bit of stories about things that I've experienced in my career with La Frontera. The reason that I'm really wanting to tell you guys stories is because I think that change happens with proximity. So meaning, if you are around people that you don't understand and you get to know them, then you'll understand. And that'll decrease some of the stigma about anything, right? So when we don't know something, we tend to stigmatize it and say, well, we've heard that this is what that is, and I don't want to deal with it. But when you hear about people, and you hear about people that might be close to you, or even just here in Tucson, actual real people, then we start some change, right? We see that empathize with people, that people do suffer from mental illness, and that it's okay, and that it can affect anybody. Because one thing about mental health is that it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're black, if you're white, if you're Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Mental health can affect anyone. It does not discriminate. So that's what's important for me as a social worker, is to try to minimize stigma, right? So La Frontera is a huge corporation. We have offices in Phoenix, we have offices in southern, eastern Arizona, and we have a bunch of offices here, and we do a variety of different things. So I'm going to talk more about the stuff that we do here in Tucson, okay? So La Frontera has a bunch of outpatient clinics where folks can come in and get services. They can get medication services, therapy, employment services, so we help people develop employment skills to be able to then go into the workforce. Different groups, healthy relationship, anger management, intensive outpatient substance abuse services. We have residential facilities where people live there for a little bit, whether it be for substance abuse or for mental health. We also have a psychiatric hospital, which is called the Level 1 facility. It's a facility that's locked, and you can't leave unless you sign a waiver that says, I'm leaving, right? So that's kind of the little gist of what La Frontera does. Some of the people that we serve are from 0 to death, right? So we have services for folks from ages 0 to 5 in a separate clinic. And I will say that 0 to 5 is one of the most important times in anyone's life, and some of us don't even remember that time. But it's something that will shape our lives for the rest of our lives. So it's really important, that age range. After that, we have a clinic that serves children from 5 to about 13-ish. And then we have a young adult clinic that serves teens around 12 to about 22. And they're all kind of separated. And then we have adult services that goes all the way to end of life. Okay? Within adult services, we have what's called seriously mentally ill folks, and that's SMI. Lots of acronyms in our profession. But people with serious mental illness tend to die a lot sooner than the regular population, right? So this is why it's so important that we provide services to people with serious mental illness. Does anybody know what serious mental illness is? Like, what's the diagnosis within a serious mental illness? Yeah. Schizophrenia. Yeah. DID. Yeah. Bipolar. Yeah. So all of those and many more are under SMI, serious mental ill. And folks who are diagnosed with these different illnesses, on average, die 25 years sooner than a regular person, right? So right now, the average lifespan is about 78. So think about that. We take away 25 years, and persons with these mental illnesses die 25 years. So one thing that La Frontera did, and most of the state is doing that now, is integrating services. So what that means is, we want to bring medical services into our behavioral health services. Because the reason that folks with serious mental illnesses die sooner is because they have no access to primary care, to actual medical, physical care, because they're always in treatment for their mental health, right? So, and the reason for that is not because they can't go to the doctor, it's because sometimes, think about this, right? You're in your doctor's office, and you see someone sitting there rocking, maybe talking to themselves or grabbing at the air, right? They're responding to that internal stimuli that's part of their mental illness. Someone who's schizophrenic, for example. And people get scared, right? They're like, "Ooh, what's wrong with that person?" Right? And sometimes they'll call and say, "Please kick them out." And that happens, right? And it actually happened to me, to one of my clients. It was really interesting because I had a client who she was always very lonely because of her mental illness. So schizophrenia in particular, a lot of the psychotic disorders have what we call negative symptoms. When we think about negative, we always think about it as like bad, but no, it's about subtracting. It takes away from someone. It takes away their personality at times. They're not able to laugh at jokes as much as they used to before their illness. They're not able to experience and express joy the way that they used to. And so it gets really lonely, right? And especially if people are kind of treating you bad because you're talking to yourself. So I had a client who had purses. She loved handbags. Okay? And she used to talk to her purses, and her purses talked back to her. And they were her friends. And that's all the friends that she had, because when she talked to her purse, people thought she was not well, right? And she had a UTI. And I sent her to her doctor because she's entitled to a doctor because she has access, insurance, so she went. And I got a call from the nurse that was there. She said, "You have to come get your client or I'm gonna put her in the psych ward." And I said, "Why? What's going on?" I'm thinking, she's yelling, screaming, trying to attack someone, because that happens. And she said she's talking to her purse. And my response was like, "Well, what's the purse telling her?" And she's like, quiet on the phone. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not saying the purse talks, but what's the problem, right?" She's like, "Oh, nothing. She's just talking to herself and scaring the other patients." And I said, "Well, she's entitled to her appointment. I'm not going to come get her, and I'm not going to be okay with you putting her on a hold, because that's what that is." So a level 1 facility, at times when people are a danger to themselves or a danger to others, will hold people against their will for 72 hours to 2 weeks, depending on what's going on. Right? In that scenario, it's possible that someone could do that to someone. So what I do now is I supervise a whole entire clinic. So I have a lot of staff under me. Some of the things that I tell them are these types of stories. Because one of the things about mental health is that it's not so much training you to be able to use the computer or training you to be able to say the right thing. It's about having empathy and understanding for people, right? And not re-traumatizing people. A lot of our folks get re-traumatized over and over by the same systems that they have to figure out and navigate. And so that was one thing for that particular client. So those are SMI folks, right? They have these different disorders. And some people with bipolar, for example, they don't have to move into an SMI category. There's also what we call general mental health, GMH. And those folks are people who are pretty much, they're all right. They're functioning pretty okay. They might need a little bit of, like antidepressants because they have a little bit of depression or some anxiety. But for the most part, they're really good. They're going to work, their moms, their dads, all that good stuff. And so we service them. We also have substance abuse services. And substance abuse folks are a little bit trickier. They're tricky in the sense that a lot of people will use substances to self-medicate. Meaning, I want to feel better because I'm so depressed, so I'm going to use some meth, right? Or I want to get the voices out, so I'm going to use some heroin. And that happens, right? So there's those two things. And then there's people that just generally just use drugs, right? Our substance abuse folks, like I said, are a little bit trickier to help because people need to, and you guys have probably heard this before, you have to know you have a problem before you can get help, right? And a lot of people don't think they have a problem. So we call our stages of change, right? So to move people through their stages of change, we have to kind of, one, not judge, right? That's one thing I don't judge people. People are doing the best they can with what they have. So we're not going to judge them for that, right? But we have to move them through the stage of change. So the first stage of change is called pre-contemplation. That means I'm good, nothing's wrong with me. I'm partying, I'm happy. Yeah, so what if I lost my job? It's their fault. Blaming other people about what's going on with them, right? That's pre-contemplation. And in that moment, what I do if someone comes to me, because we get referrals from all places, whether it's a wife or a husband that's upset because they're still drinking or whatever. We get stuff from probation officers saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to put you back in jail. We get referrals from all places. So a lot of times people are there because they have to be, not because they want to be. So how do we get around that? It's really about not judging and saying, okay, I get it. Your PO sent you, but you got to be here for an hour. What can we talk about? Right? So we move them through the stage of change. I get it, you're good, but in case you know someone who needs this, let me give you my card. Go pass it out to your friends. Oftentimes people who do drugs aren't doing drugs by themselves. They're with other people, right? So they have to come back and we move them to the next stage, which might be contemplation. So there's pre-contemplation and contemplation. And they'll say stuff like, Stephanie, well, you know what? Maybe you're right. I'm tired of feeling this way. Maybe I do have a problem. I don't know though. I don't know. And some of the things that we're doing, I don't know if you guys know this, but the number one reason for death between folks who are 17 to 22 is fentanyl overdoses right now. Pima County. Number one death. And sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's on purpose, right? But the thing is that fentanyl is out there and it's in everything. And I'm telling you guys this because it's young adults that are experiencing this right now. Number one cause of death. So it's important to us to try to affect that, right? So in substance use, again, trying to move those people through that stage of change is really hard. But what we do is like, hey, we're gonna help you through that. So one thing, especially with fentanyl right now, that we do at La Frontera is we hand out what's called naloxone. Anybody know what that is? It stops overdoses, yeah. So it's something that combats the chemicals that are happening in your brain when someone is overdosing on an opiate. You ever know what an opiate is?
Like opioids? So like
Opioids, yeah. Say that.
Like
Heroin, Percocets, like any kind of narcotic pills that people get prescribed. Fentanyl is an opiate. So for those things, it'll stop the overdose from happening. Right? So we hand those out like it's candy. We also hand out fentanyl test strips, right? And one thing to know when we talk about the bigger picture is that not till about maybe a couple of months ago, in October of last year, it was illegal to give out fentanyl test strips or to exchange needles. And there's exchange needle programs, but they have to follow so many regulations and so much red tape, right? So we give out fentanyl test strips, and what that means is, hey, just in case, test your meth, because it might have fentanyl. Test your Percocet, because it might have fentanyl. And so you guys might be thinking like, wow, right? But this is harm reduction. I can't make somebody do something they don't want to do. So I'm going to help them do it safer to help save their life, right? And when I do that, folks tend to say, wow, Stephanie really cares about me. She's not judging me about me using drugs. She's actually trying to help me do it safely, right? So that's what we do, and that's kind of moves you to that stage of change. Because the number one predictor of success in mental health is your relationship with your case manager, with your treatment team, the people that you go see. And so I'm sure you guys don't like to be told what to do all the time. If you're set on something, you want to do it, and you don't like to hear that you can't, right? So we don't do that. We really try to just, all right, we'll work on what you want to work on. You don't want to work on your substance abuse? What else do you want to do? Well, I'm fighting with my wife a lot, or I'm fighting with my siblings. Okay, let's figure that out. So that's one thing with the fentanyl test strips and all that stuff. We do that to help people move through the stage of change. So those are our populations that we serve. And in that, there's a bunch of different services that can be offered. It just depends on the needs of the people coming to our clinic. So what we do is we do an assessment, a biopsychosocial, which looks at, asks a bunch of questions about their life. Right? We get all that info and we say, all right, here's what we recommend for treatment. And then they decide if they want it or not. And that's kind of how we go about business, right? I know the Unity Club asked me to talk a little bit about how I got into it and what I do. So I was 21 years old when I started in this field, right? And I was graduating the U of A. I had a political science degree, nothing to do with social work. I had no idea what social work was or that this profession even existed. I talked to some of my sorority sisters because my dad said, hey, you gotta get a job. So I'm like, what can I do? And someone told me, hey, work at a group home. Does anybody know what a group home is? Yeah. Yeah, so that's exactly what a group home is. It's a placement. It's a place where people live. I worked at a group home for teenagers, for people in the children's system. And when we talk about bigger picture children's system, it's very different from adults, right? One thing about the children's system is that we have to house people. Children shouldn't be homeless, and that is true. Children should not be homeless. But once you turn 18, you can get the boot, and you can be homeless. So it's a big rude awakening at that time, right? So I worked for a group home. I was 21 years old, and I remember my sorority sister saying, it's just like babysitting. And it's not. It was so much more, but that's what attracted me to it. It's gonna be easy, right? But it's so much more. I got to meet some amazing teenagers, resilient teenagers. People that had, stories that you guys have never heard, and you wonder, how are you still here, right? Just resilience is just so amazing. So I loved it. I fell in love with what I was doing. And I said, how can I impact more? So that's when I moved over to La Frontera. And I became a case manager for young adults, which is really cool. I wanted to work with kids, and I think my range is young adults. That's what I like to do. So I got to work with young adults and create a whole entire program for young adults, because at that time, the state of Arizona really felt that the transition between 18 to 22 was one of the most severe times in people's lives, right? And if you think about it, it kind of is. I remember moving out of my parents' house at 18, moving up to Tucson, and feeling scared, not knowing how to navigate Tucson. First of all, Gal is a tiny little town in the south, right? And I was scared. It was scary, but I had protective factors. I had family that loved me. I had income, right? I was able to live on the dorms. I had a lot of privilege, if you will, right? So some people don't get that. And that's where I work. So I wanted to affect more change. So I went to La Frontera and I worked in the adult program. And I'm going to tell you guys a little story, because 18 to 22 is usually where schizophrenia develops, right? People have either a predisposition to it, and then something happens, traumatic most of the time, and it switches a thing in your brain, and then you develop schizophrenia. You have your first psychotic break. And I remember we had a client. We call our members clients. They're our clients. That's what we work with. And I had a client, and she was in the young adult program. She was 19 years old, and she was going to school to be a cosmetologist. But she was with us because she was having some trouble with her grandma, and she was fighting a lot. She was diagnosed with bipolar. So she was coming to group, and we had a whole little, program going on. We would take them on field trips and things like that. And so she was coming to group. And as a way to entice people to come, like when there's food, people will come. There's free food out there, right? We were doing free food and then free outings. So if you came to 10 groups, you got to go to an outing. And the outings were like bowling, fantastics, golf and stuff. Things like that they would have fun, where they weren't thinking about, I'm a young adult with a mental illness. It's like we're just gonna be normal kids. And that's what they really wanted to feel, is that normalcy, whatever that is. So anyway, she was studying to be a cosmetologist. She graduated. Now she had to take her test. That was the next thing. And so she was coming to group, right? And you need to have 10 groups to be able to go on your outing. 10 groups. We would offer groups all day long, so you could hit it, in 5 days. But she had missed 2 groups. So she had told us the group before that she was so excited she's gonna go take her test. I'm gonna get my test and I'm gonna go work at, what's that place called? Gatineau. She's so excited about planning her future. She's 19 years old, right? So she failed. She failed her test. And she came to the outing after missing 2 groups. So she only had 8 groups, right? At this time, I was promoted to the manager of that team. So we're working, and the guy that was going to take them on the outing, he told her on the van, in front of all the other peers, or other people that were there, hey, you missed 2 groups, you can't come. And this guy was a jerk, so I fired him after this. But people like that should not be working in mental health. So he said, you can't come. And kind of embarrassed her in front of everybody, and left her. So I'm in the office because it was his turn to take it. I'm like, why is she here? So open and call her Susie. I'm like, Susie, what happened? And she's like, Eric said I couldn't go because I missed 2 groups. I'm like, oh yeah, you did, but why did you miss the groups? I took my test and I failed. And I feel like a loser. Like, I worked so hard and I'm not gonna be a cosmetologist, and I'm not gonna work at the Gatineau, and I'm gonna stay with my grandma who hates me and fights her. So she was just catastrophic thinking, that's what we call it, when it's the end of the world. And sometimes, guys, it feels like it, right? So at that time I was 23, 24, I know what that feels like. When you feel like, God, it's over. I remember thinking when I was in high school that if I got a B, it was the end of the world. I didn't, but it's not, guys, it's not. But I used to think that, so I know what that feels like. And she sat in my office and I told her, want to call your grandma so she can come pick you up? She said, no, my grandma was really excited I was going to go do stuff with my friends. I'll just wait till 5 and pretend I went. So she just sat in my office. It was really sad. She was crying. So grandma came, picked her up, and they went home. This was on a Friday. I come into work Monday morning. She's at the psychiatric hospital, experiencing complete delusions. She thought she had died. The psychiatric hospital was hell. That's what she told me. She didn't recognize me anymore. I went to go visit her. She called me all the names in the book and said, "Am I a demon? Because you're in hell right now." And did not want to talk to me. And that went on for about 45 days. She experienced her first psychotic break, and after that, she was diagnosed as schizophrenic and continued to have psychotic breaks throughout the time I worked with her. But one of the things about the approach to mental health, and this is what I hope you guys take away today, is that not to judge and to know that people are experiencing what they experience and how can we help, right? So what I used to do is I used to schedule a time every week. I'd go to the hospital, even though she needed me to call me all the names in the book. And I would just go and smile and try to be nice, right? Just to try to have that conversation with her. And eventually she gave in. She asked me, "Are you dead too?" And I said, "No, I'm not dead." She's like, "Well, I know I'm dead. I'm in hell." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not dead, and if I'm here, maybe you're not dead either. I don't know though," right? I never told her she was wrong. Because people believe what they believe, right? And it's really hard. Think about your own beliefs. If someone tries to tell you what you believe is not true, you're like, "Be quiet. I don't think it. I know I'm here." And her delusions were so big that that's what she really believed, right? So that's how I work with her. It's like, "Well, I'm not, so I don't know, and I'm here," right? You have to have people see that for themselves. When we talk about stages of change, it's not just for substance abuse, it's also for mental health. People have to be able to recognize, wait, there is something off. This person is trying to help me, right? And so her goal was to go back to Texas with her mom. And a lot of people told her that she would never be able to do that. And guess what she did after about 2 years? She went back to Texas with her mom, right? And I remember I used to work with her. She ended up going, after those 45 days, she ended up going to what we call a level 2 facility, which is also at La Frontera. A level 2 facility is where people go to get help, right? They have medications there. They have staff who help them with coping skills, with independent living skills. And they can stay there anywhere between 90 to 6 months. It depends, 90 days to 6 months. And she was there for a good year. So she was learning about herself, learning about her illness, right? I remember one time we were going to an art meeting. That's when the whole team meets together. And we were going to this room that does look pretty scary, so I can see why she thought it was a gas chamber. She's like, "Are you taking me to the gas chamber, Stephanie?" I was like, "Why would I go into the gas chamber with you?" And she would start laughing. She's like, You're right, I'm having a delusion right now." So she was able to recognize when she wasn't in her right mind, right? As we were walking, she's like, "I also think, can I tell you something? I also think I might be Nicki Minaj right now." "Am I Nicki Minaj right now?" And I'm like, "Girl, I don't think so. I don't see no paparazzis." And we're in Tucson, and I heard that she's trying to, so just talking. She's like, "Yeah, you're probably right." I'm like, "Yeah." And so we would listen to Nicki Minaj in the car, or do whatever. But that was the thing, is like, again, people can have these illnesses and still be people, and still have these conversations. And there's no need for us to say, "You're wrong, I'm right," right? If that's what you're feeling, that's what you feel. But I know in my space, right, here's where I am, right? One time she asked me, "Are we dreaming right now?" I'm like, "Let's pinch ourselves." "Ooh, mine hurt. I'm not dreaming." "Did you pinch you? Did you pinch yourself?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm not dreaming either." Right? So that's schizophrenia. Those are hallucinations. That's delusions. And oftentimes I do a lot of trainings at work. I train all the new staff. And oftentimes get asked, "What do you do when someone is being delusional in your office?" Right? I've had people say, that guy, and there's nobody over there. So what do? Well, we acknowledge that that's what they're seeing. "Hey, I see there's a guy over there scaring you. I don't see them, but I want to help you. It looks like you're terrified. How can I help?" Right? What can we do? And that's how we work through that, right? She was one of my favorite clients. Once I became a coordinator, I didn't have a whole lot of time because I'm managing staff at that point, and I would keep some people that I really liked, that I liked to work with, and she was one of them. Let me see what time it is, but I want to make sure. Okay. Then, so that was our young adult psychotic break type of story, right? I also had a lady who was elderly who would disassociate. She would go through episodes or something, and she would not remember anything that happened. She went through a lot of traumatic experience that helped her disassociate, right? So when she was going through the traumatic experience, she would pretend she'd be somewhere else. And then as soon as anything got out of whack, that's what she would do. But she would also self-harm. And self-harm is something that is a coping skill. A negative one, but it is a coping skill, right? So trying to teach her to get out of that was a little bit difficult because it worked for her. It worked. And for that, it's a lot of therapy. So I don't want to talk so much about that right now. But to get out of self-harm, it's a lot of therapy. It's a lot of thinking about things that I'm going to do before I do what I'm doing. It's harming myself. And I have a bunch of other stories, but I want to make sure I have some time for you guys to ask any questions you guys have. Currently, right now, though, I'm now supervising a whole entire clinic, which means there's doctors, there's therapists. I think I might have said that already. And my approach, though, to my clinic is that we make sure that we're non-judgmental. Right? That when people walk through the door, we look them in the eyes and say hello. Unless their culture says not to, so then we won't, right? So culture is important, very important in mental health. When we think about the disparities of people accessing mental health, sometimes culture is a big, big component to that, right? So at La Frontera, we have the majority of our clients are Caucasian, and that's because that's the majority of the people in Tucson. And we have Hispanic people depending on where the location of the clinic is. In my clinic, I'm over on Prince and Mountain. So the location, we have a lot more elderly folks, right? And so for us, it's always a success when our SMI clients, because right, they die a little bit before they're 78. It's always a success when they're 65. They've made it. They beat that statistic, right? And so we keep going. We keep helping them to have a better quality of life. So yeah, I wanted to open up to you guys, whatever you guys wanted to talk about or ask me. Again, there's so much information about how systems apply to mental health, how even the way grocery stores are laid out, how that applies to mental health, right? When you think about if you guys ever drive to the south side of Tucson, there aren't a whole lot of Fry's or a whole lot of Sprouts or places like that. And so then you think about what that does. A lot of the people with SMI illnesses live on the south side of town because there's lower income housing, right? Not only that, a lot of the medications they take cause them to gain weight, right? That also causes them to die sooner because they don't go to the doctor because they're, shunned away from being in there. So there's just so much, and that's why I was telling the Unity Club, I can't make a PowerPoint because it goes in so many directions and we could be here for literally hours. So I kind of want to give you guys the floor, and if you guys have any questions or things that you're interested about, that I didn't cover or that you want me to expand on, I totally can. So just
this is kind of like an illness specific question, but how do you help people who are borderline?
Ooh, I love it. Okay, borderline personality disorder. Do you want to explain what that is? Do you know what it is?
Kind of, but I don't have a great grasp.
Okay, so borderline personality disorder is a disorder that is very much stereotyped. And actually, a lot of professionals in the field do not like working with folks that have borderline personality disorder. And it's really sad because it doesn't matter. If they won't even meet the person, they'll just read that that's their diagnosis and say, oh, and already have a pre-idea of what that is. But basically, someone who's borderline personality, they have learned to manipulate things to go their way. It's a coping skill, right? And any type of personality disorder, not just borderline, but there's narcissistic personality disorder, there's histrionic personality disorder. Any personality disorder can only be treated through therapy. There's no medication that's going to help. They have to go to therapy. And the main therapy for borderline personality is DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. People who are borderline personality disorder, they tend to see things very, very negatively. So it's either it's great or it's not. They don't see the middle, right? And the middle, the dialectical means two, that there's two things and we meet in the middle, right? So dialectical behavioral therapy is that. It says that, yes, you've had a hard day and tomorrow will be better, right? And it's getting to understand that and kind of training your brain to not think these catastrophic things but they're very difficult to work with because it's a reactive coping skill, right? Persons who develop this disorder when they were younger were probably told to be quiet. They were told to not cry, that you shouldn't feel a certain way when you feel a certain way. So they would rather not feel feelings and not feel anything. So they don't tend to attach well to other people, or they attach too much. They're usually in a lot of codependent relationships, where they might be in abusive relationships, things like that. So it is something that that happens because of their personality, not so much a mental illness. I mean, it is, but it's not something that you can get medication for, if that makes sense. So most of the time it's DBT therapy that'll help, dialectical behavioral therapy, and there's different components to that. So again, that could be a whole entire training. And I always say that DBT should be taught in schools because when you're a teenager, that's exactly what's happening. You are emotion regulation everywhere, and you're trying to figure it out, and it's hard. Like, it really is hard, right? So I always say that. And so, I can always come back and we can do a DBT little thing. But yeah, DBT is amazing, and that's what really helps people with borderline personality. But again, they have to want to do that and understand that they do have something that they need to work on. Yeah.
What do you think as like younger generation should do to improve or just like stop the stigma around mental health or just like improve our own mental health?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So what do we do as a younger generation to try to improve stigma with mental health? I think one of the biggest things is normalizing it, right? It's saying, hey, I have anxiety too. I know what that feels like. Not only that, it's having empathy for people. It's understanding that, hey, they are doing the best they can with what they have, and maybe they don't know any better. So I have to try to teach better, right? Or I have to try to be a better lending ear or a better friend, or have empathy that maybe it's not about me, because 99.9% of the time it's not about you, it's about what's going on with them, right? So I think that's important, is to normalize some of these things, to talk about them, to be open. Because if you were to talk to your friends and say, I experience anxiety when this happens, I'm pretty sure they probably do too, right? So it is really important to try to normalize some of it, and then when you do hear something, you can ask, like, well, how does it look like for you? Is there anything I can do to help when that happens, right? Because anxiety looks very different for everybody. Some people will talk faster, some people will pace, some people will shut down. And so then it's like, if I know that you're going through some anxiety, what's going to help? So I think that's something that we could do as a society as a whole, is having more empathy for each other, right? It's kind of like when someone cuts you off in traffic or whatever, and it's like you want to, but hey, maybe they really have to pee. I mean, that's what I tell people. Like, maybe they're going through something, and it's like, they didn't do anything. So I'm going to not judge them, and I'm going to, wusa myself, right? So that's something we could do, for sure. Yeah.
Kind of expanding on how you deal with clients who like don't want to be there or are very intense getting help.
Absolutely. So we have what's called Title 36 court order treatment. And what that means is that a person was committed to the hospital, and a judge says, hey, you need to be in treatment for a whole year. So we have folks like that, and they don't want to be in treatment. Like, they hate us, okay? So yeah, it's very hard. So one of the things about that is that when someone's under a treatment like that, where they're made by a judge to come to treatment, as a treatment facility, we have the ability to put them in the hospital again without their consent. So it's super traumatic, because cops will come, pick them up from their home, take them to the hospital, and put them in a psychiatric hospital, right? So we try to explain that first, that could happen. But we also don't make them engage in treatment in the sense of making them and forcing them. Because if I were here trying to teach you guys something and you didn't care, you're not going to care, and it's not going to matter. It's not going to help, it's not going to make you better. So what we do is we do what's called motivational interviewing. It's a type of technique in therapy where we meet people where they are, kind of in their stage of change. So if someone's there because their PO is making them, we're like, well, dude, you got to be here for an hour. What do you want to talk about? You want to color? You like, really, that's what we'll do. We're like, you got to hang out with me. I got to sign your paper. So what do you want to do? And then we end up building that rapport with them. Right? I said earlier that our rapport with our members, our clients, is what's going to determine their success. A lot of times people that don't want treatment, it's because they're scared. Right? They're scared themselves, and they don't know. And it's just, can I trust this person to tell them my deepest, darkest secrets? Because that's what happens. People tell us the traumas they've been through. And so it's gaining that trust with them. And that's what we do. We use motivational interviewing, where it's like, well, what do you want to do? Cool, let's do that then. And then as we're talking, we kind of throw little things in there like, well, and how's your job life going, when I know that they don't have a job because they were doing drugs on the job, right? So like, now they got to talk about it. And so we start talking, and we start building that confidence and trust with each other. And then they actually like coming to group. That's kind of how we do it. Yeah, why don't you put your hands up first?
How do you help encourage a friend who doesn't
want to go to therapy?
How do you help encourage a friend who doesn't want to? I think that's a really good question. It's hard, right? Because you also still want to maintain being their friend. And sometimes people feel like you're pushing me too hard. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going through anymore. When I used to work at the group home, I had girls who kind of were very similar, right? They didn't want my help. They didn't. So what I used to do is I used to say stuff like, well, I have this other friend who's going through this, a very similar situation to whatever they're going through. I'm like, what would you suggest I tell them? And oftentimes they're very kind of contradicting to what, you know, they don't take their own advice. But it's important because it's like, again, trying to normalize it. So I have another person who's going through this. What would you do for them, right? But it is hard. It's hard to encourage someone who doesn't want help. Again, those stages of change, that pre-contemplation, is just trying to have them see how their behavior or whatever it is that they're doing is affecting them. The things that they're losing. A lot of times that happens. They lose friendships. They lose housing. They lose their parents. It's like they lose family because of what they're doing. And sometimes it's not until then that happens. Depending on what the issue is, I mean, there's different things that you could do. But yeah, it's one of those things that it's like just being there for them, and then maybe trying to bring in other aspects of like, if you could help somebody in your situation, what would you say? Without telling them that it's their situation. That makes sense? It's kind of like the motivational interview and stuff. Like, if you knew that someone was doing drugs and all this stuff, what would you tell them? And it's like them doing the same thing, right? So then they have to vocalize that I would tell them this. And like, hey, wait a second, that's happening to me too. And that's something that you could try. But I think being available, not judging, that's another one. And it's really hard. I tell you guys I don't judge, but we all judge. We all judge, whether we want to agree with that or not. You know, the guy cutting me off, I call him a jerk, that's judging. I don't know him, but he's a jerk now, right? So not judging what they're doing. Like trying to understand, like, I see that you're doing this because of this, here's another way, right? Here's a better coping skill. And it's hard to have those conversations with folks who don't want it. Yeah.
This is a school that was fifth grade to middle school to high school. And on the rare occasion when we do talk about mental health in the school, usually generally associated with the older kids. So how do we introduce mental health to the younger kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to talk to you guys from personal experience. I have a son who's 9. Is that, no, that's 5th grade. Is that 5th grade? No, that's 4th. Well, almost 5th grade. Yeah, almost 5th grade. And he was having a lot of issues with concentrating. So he actually got diagnosed with ADD. And me having been, you know, I could do therapy if I wanted. I don't necessarily like doing therapy. But, so I kind of know how to deal with that. So up until they told me that in 1st grade that he might have ADD. And I was like, no, we're going to figure it out. We did a lot of like cueing and things like that. So with him, he asked me, like, is something wrong with me? And I said, no, man, you have a cool brain. Like, the thing is that there's nothing wrong, right? It's kind of like if someone had diabetes, would you say that something like they're wrong, like they're bad, like we don't? No, it's an illness, right? So that's kind of how I try to normalize it again. It's like it's an illness. It's something we go through, and there's help for it, right? There's things that we do, like you get a cold, you take medicine. That's kind of how it works. So I think it's important to understand that again, not bringing it as like, oh my God, you're diagnosed with this. No, it's like, hey, cool. So now I can help you, right? ADD is one of those things that a lot of people aren't able to concentrate and focus on things that take a lot of mental effort, but they have amazing ideas, right? That's my kid. My kid has amazing ideas, and when it's time, he's like, I don't feel like it, right? Like he can't mentally put that effort in there. And that has to do with things in the brain, like it's an actual thing. So when someone can't do that because their brain doesn't function that way, it's not their fault. Like their brain doesn't work that way. So now we have to try to help it work that way. So I think it's again, coming to like the medical aspect of it, right? Normalizing it in that sense, that it's not something wrong, it's an illness. And so like any other illness, we're gonna treat it, right? And no one's out there talking bad about the guy who has, you know, high blood pressure or whatever. We're not doing that, we're treating it. So I think it's always important to explain, right, the definition of things. So there's something called the DSM-5, which is where all the diagnostics are for mental health. And in that book, there are criteria for every single diagnosis. And when you end up reading that, if you're someone who suffers from a mental illness and you read it, you're like, oh, okay, like that's what's wrong with me. I get it, yeah, I fit that category, right? Kind of like when you have a broken leg, they're gonna give you a cast. Well, if you have, you know, borderline personality, you're gonna get this medication to help. It's It's the same concept, but we've always really separated it, right? So I had mentioned earlier that La Frontera is trying to bring primary care into our offices so that we can extend quality of life. And that's some of that. It's like we're treating everything, the whole person. Because if you're not well in your mental health, your physical health also suffers, and vice versa, right? If you're physically not well, your mental health suffers. So I think it's important of putting the person as a whole person. So a person as a whole in 8 different, we call it the wellness, the 8 different aspects of wellness. So it's spiritually, vocationally, mentally, physically, financially. I'm sure there's 3 more, and I can't think of them all. But that is what we're looking at, right? To treat a person as a whole, versus I don't care about your mental health. I'm only here for your broken leg, you know. So that's important. That it's part of everybody, and really that we all at some point have had some anxiety. I'm sure, you know, we may not diagnose with it because it didn't impact our daily living, but we know what that feels like, right? And we know what it feels like to not be able to focus. So I think it's, again, normalizing that, and that sometimes people just have a little bit harder times with it and they need extra help, you know. Anybody? I saw a hand over here. No other questions, guys? I think that might be our time. Oh, over it.
Go ahead.
We have 1 minute.
How do you sort of like balance your mental health with all the other things you do, like making sure that you have enough time to do a lot of schoolwork?
Yeah, so work-life balance, right? Yeah. So one thing that you want to do, and it's funny, I tell adults this too, but it's really good for kids. A lot of times our mental health suffers when we're under stress, right? And stress is caused by having a lot of homework or having tests and you're stressed out about something, or interpersonal relationship with your friends or whatever, right? You have stress. And it's important for your well-being to end your stress cycle. And what that means is that when you think about a zebra getting attacked by a lion, right? It's fight or flight. Either I'm running away from the lion or I'm gonna die. And then the zebra doesn't think about that anymore. Like, the zebra's not, oh my God, that one time the lion almost got me. He's not thinking about that. Humans, we think about that. We're like, oh, that time when I told the girl, oh, you know, and we're ruminating on it. And so we're not ending our stress cycle. The lion and the zebra end their stress cycle all the time, so they don't think about those things. Really good ways to end stress cycles are doing creative things with your hands. Be creative, color, paint, do something after you had a stressful situation, right? Another great thing is 20-second hugs. I know that sounds crazy, but it helps release oxytocin in your brain, and it makes the stress hormones go away. So 20 seconds is a long time, so please make sure you ask permission to hug this person. But yeah, 20-second hugs. The other thing is physical activity. So getting up and running. I always tell my staff, before you get home, do some jumping jacks outside your door, because you need to end your stressful day and get that energy out. So if anything, for your daily living stuff, that's what you want to do, is end your stress cycle, right? So whether you're working out, whether you're hanging out with friends that love you and care about you and you're hugging on them, I mean, that's great. You know, doing creative things with your hands, you know. Another one that no one really likes because people think it's a weakness is crying. Let it out, man, cry, it's okay, right? People fear that because it feels ugly inside to cry. But one thing I will tell you guys is that if you're not able to feel, right, we're going back to the borderline personality people that don't like to feel things, you end up being in this sort of level place where you don't feel anything, not even the good stuff. So it's really important that we feel stuff. So if you want to cry, cry. And sit in it for a little bit and then come out, right? Because crying is good for you. You really think it's not, but it is. Because if you could feel the worst, you can also feel the best. And if you don't allow yourself to feel the worst, you can't feel the best. So that's important. So crying if you need to. Sleep. Oh my gosh, guys, sleep. Please don't be on your phones at 11 o'clock midnight, whatever. Like, sleep. You guys need to sleep. Sleep will end stress cycles. So you need to get your rest. So that's important. I think that might be some of them, all of them. But yeah, do things that make you feel good. Surround yourself with people that make you feel good. But that's like over the daily stuff, you know, to not be so stressed out to where it affects your mental health. And the other thing too is thinking to yourselves, like when someone's upset at you or something happens and you know that you did nothing wrong, it's a them problem. You know what I mean? Like, I did nothing to upset her. I said good morning and she didn't say hi. I'm not going to ruminate on that because I haven't done anything to upset or offend the person. Sometimes people, again, are going through their own stuff. And we tend to think that it's our problem, and it's not. It's their problem, right? So also not stressing the little stuff. It's just little stuff. I like to always think about, will this matter in next month? Will it matter in 2 years? Will it matter in 5? And most of the time, the answers to those questions are no, it won't matter. You know? Any other questions? You know, I think we're up. Time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman, for giving us his theater today for this wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, did you guys enjoy it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
This is like a reading.
Yeah, anybody want to grab a flyer?
This is like,
And then also, I want to throw it out there, both Mrs. Fuego and I have a bunch of those mini pocket guidebooks that have, they have the crisis center phone number on there, they have the warm line, the suicide hotline. Keep one of those on you. Keep it for yourself, keep it for your friends. We have that, you know? Thank you guys.
Join our club.
Yeah. Come on Friday.